Morning. This is going to look good. After Easter, we're going to begin a series that focuses on Jesus being under investigation, the Da Vinci Code. The 4 Sundays prior to the film's opening, we'll deal with some issues that will help you to ferret out what's fact and what's fiction relative to the movie, which is going to be a very interesting movie. Good cast. And so first week we'll look at serious allegations. We'll look at the kind of things that the book says about Jesus, and if they are important to really deal with them, we'll look at eyewitness evidence. What does the biblical writers who claim this is what Jesus said, how do we know that they said that stuff? Then we'll look at questionable credibility. There are some writers that wrote at the time that said some things about Jesus that don't really seem to fit, and we'll look at why we shouldn't really accept what they had to say. And finally, we'll look at evidence that demands a verdict. And we'll figure out, okay, on the basis of all that stuff, so what? What difference does it make? So that begins the Sunday right after Easter. We'll put a magazine in your hands. Good, little short 18-page thing that will give you some information and be something you could even pass on to somebody else. But for this week, we are looking at passion plants. The last week of Jesus' life is known as Passion Week. And the plants that we find along the route that Jesus took tell key aspects of the story. We'll look at 3 palms. We'll look at that today. Then on Friday, we will look at thorns. And then next Sunday, we'll look at vines. But today, we look at palms. I think of palms, the thing to capture is they stand for the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness. Before we read the passage, you might take out the sheet that's in your worship folder. Let me give you a little bit of background to understand what's happening before Jesus comes down into Jerusalem and the palm branches come out. Jesus had come from a village several miles away where he raised Lazarus from the dead, and a crowd follows him to Jerusalem. That was an amazing miracle that a number of people saw. And apparently on the way, about a 2-mile trip from Bethany to Jerusalem, there's another little community called Bethpage. And that's probably where Jesus said, okay, I want you to go get a donkey for me. And when they came to the Mount of Olives and then were coming from that mountain, they could see Jerusalem out before them. The crowd that was there, they brought palm branches along with them, and they start to wave them. Probably someone had run ahead into the city and had told people Jesus is coming and this is what he did. And they came out, and so a large crowd is with Jesus as he is making his way down this mountain into Jerusalem, but he's not there yet. With that in mind, look at what it says in John chapter 12, verses 12 and 13 in the sheet in your worship folder. It says, the next day the great crowd that had come for the feast heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. They took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel. They're thinking back a couple of centuries. This crowd that's around Jesus, many of whom are exuberant, and they are waving palm branches. Some had taken off their cloaks, put the cloaks on the mule that had come for Jesus to sit on, and even putting down their clothes in the road. For the past 600 years, at this point in which Jesus comes down, for the 600 years prior to that, Israel had been passed from one empire to another, from the Babylonians, and then the Babylonians got conquered by the Medo-Persians. And so then, if you are a subject nation to the Babylonians, now you have to serve the Medo-Persians. Then after the Medo-Persians got captured by Greece, now the Israelites get handed over to Greece. And then the Romans conquered the Greeks. Now they get handed over to the Romans. And this is how things had gone for the last 600 years. There was one shining moment, a century, 100-year time span before they were conquered by Rome. Interestingly enough, all this stuff about the kingdoms, about Babylon to Medo-Persia, Medo-Persia to Greece, Greece to Rome, you'd say, okay, I don't need to remember all that. Maybe you don't. But what's interesting is probably the book came from about 530 BC, just at the point when the Persians had conquered the Babylonians. Daniel gets a vision for the kingdoms that would arise over the course of the next centuries. And he was dead on. Now, this stuff was written hundreds of years. Well, let me show you what it says. Again, this is written hundreds of years before it actually occurred. The two-horned ram, now Daniel gets a vision, and then this vision is interpreted, and Daniel writes all this stuff down in the biblical book of Daniel, which is a book of prophecy, telling the future. The two-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat is the king of Greece. The large horn between his eyes is the first king. The four horns that replace the one that was broken off represent four kingdoms that will emerge from his nation, but will not have the same power. Greece wasn't even a world power at this point, where it talks about this is the kingdom, the shaggy goat kingdom, that will rise. Not only does it mention that there will be a kingdom, but it mentions something about the history that's important to understand. They said that there is, when it talks about the large horn between his eyes is the first king, that's Alexander the Great. And he sweeps through that area and conquers an amazing amount of territory in about 4 years. In 323, he dies without having an heir to the throne. His generals then fight among themselves, and his kingdom is divided into 4 kingdoms. The one that gets responsibility for Israel is called Seleucus. And from that line, there came a ruler that he goes on to describe. Daniel writes, in the later part of their reign, a stern-faced king, a master of intrigue, will arise. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation, will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy the mighty men and the holy people. This guy is Antiochus Epiphanes. Really, the name means God manifest. He was one of the cruelest kings ever to rule. And he ruled over Israel. They called him Antiochus Epiphanes, which is not God made manifest, Antiochus the madman. And here's what he was about. He was determined to bring Greek culture wherever he went. So what he then decided is that it wasn't okay for the Jews to worship their God. They need to worship the gods the Greek worshipped. And here's what he did. He erected an altar of the Greek god Zeus in the temple at Jerusalem. Now imagine, went into the temple, into the holy place within the temple, took the altar and made an altar to Zeus within that place. Not only did he do that, he sacrificed a pig on that altar. And if you are a Jew, there's nothing more abominable that could ever have been done. This is what Antiochus Epiphanes did. Jews were forced to participate in heathen festivities. They were put to death if they were caught with the Bible in their possession. Finally came to a place where a man named Judas Maccabeus staged a revolt. And he got some others, and it was a growing movement. They were able to overturn the Seleucid Empire and bring Israel back under national control. You say, why do I mention all this stuff? They minted a coin after the Maccabean revolt, and what it had on it? Palm branches. See, palm branches was a symbol of national deliverance. It's a symbol of victory. It's a symbol of we are free, autonomous, we rule ourselves. And these palm branches then, they were almost like the flag, symbols of national liberation. And when they take these palm branches and wave them, they're not asking for anything spiritual. They want to go back to the time where they were ruled by themselves. The word Hosanna literally means save us. It's not spiritual salvation they're asking for. It's political salvation. The Messiah, who was prophesied to come, would be a king like David, and they believed it would make them powerful once again. So when they wave these palm branches, they're saying, Hosanna. They're not asking for spiritual things. They're saying, save us from Rome. Make it like we were when Judas Maccabeus came and he overthrew the Seleucids. That's what they're asking for. Look what it says. They called Jesus the King of Israel. That was treasonous, because the Romans had already installed a king, Herod Antipas. He was the king of Israel at that time. And in calling Jesus the King of Israel, they were saying something that would be not looked well upon. In fact, the Romans, during the time of a feast like this, would have sent more troops into the city. And if this demonstration, it happens outside the walls of the city as they're walking down in. If it had happened within the city, there would have been a military response. I remember when I was in China, and we were walking through a part of Tianjin where there were Communist Party headquarters. I raised a camera and was about to take a picture. Somebody put their hand very quickly on my arm. Don't. And it felt kind of creepy. They said, you can't take pictures of Communist Party headquarters. And it kind of dawned on me that it's not the same as it is in our country. They say you can't say, just walk past. We walked past. There was a little park along, by maybe about a quarter of a mile, half a mile down. And we kind of regrouped in the park. We talked about what things were like in China at the time. This celebration, what they're doing with Jesus, it would be something like if we gathered in that park and we kind of shouted, communism is a fraud. We would have gotten a military response had they heard us. Had this palm branches, Hosanna, happen within the walls of Jerusalem, there would have been, because they knew what they were asking for, a military kind of victory. There's something very strange. As you get this scene, palm branches, cloaks, Jesus on a donkey, walking down the hill into the city, if you look on the faces of the people, they're exuberant. And look at this, what it says in your worship folder. Look what it says about Jesus. As he approached Jerusalem, and again, this is within the same celebration, Jesus, and saw the city, he wept over it and said, if you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. In the midst of all this celebration, Jesus is weeping, and I don't think just weeping, I think he is sobbing. He just wept maybe a day or two before at the grave of Lazarus, and he was entering into the grief of the people. This grief that he feels now was a deeper grief, and here's why. The people with him are looking a couple hundred years in the past. Jesus is looking about 40 years into the future, at a time that he knows is coming when the Romans will come into Jerusalem and will crush a rebellion so violently that literally not one stone was left on top of another. Children and adults dashed to the ground. It was terrible. And Jesus is looking and seeing what's going to happen, and it's almost like a king who, having been away, comes into his kingdom and finds it in ruins. So the people are rejoicing and waving the palm branches. And Jesus is sobbing because he knows what's going to happen within a generation. The palms represent shattered dreams and crushed expectations, people pursuing happiness, believing it finally has come. A powerful king who will certainly turn the forces in our favor, will enable us to be an autonomous kingdom once again. They'll follow him as long as the salvation he gives them offers relief on this side of the grave. But when it doesn't happen, that's why you can go from Palm Sunday to Good Friday in less than a week. Less than a week. This is Sunday or Saturday. By Friday, they're going to be calling for his death. Why? Because he didn't give them the kind of political relief that they sought. And this became a source of huge resentment. Somebody said unrealistic expectations are premeditated resentments. And that's what they find. The pursuit of happiness, they look for it in an earthly place. The peace they look for is earthly. It's the peace that comes from an earthly kingdom. But the peace Jesus is extending to them is not earthly. It is heavenly. But they're too caught up with visions of earthly peace to see what Jesus is offering them. He's offering them peace that's heavenly. Here we find another group of people who are waving palm branches, but they've found happiness. Let's look and see what it says. Under point B. After this, I looked. This is John's revelation. Again, this is another book of prophecy like Daniel's was, but this is on this side of Jesus. And he's saying what will happen at the end. The Bible predicts things that happen. And when it predicts that this will happen, the Bible is real accurate relative to what it predicts. It's already come about. This stuff it talks about, God knows the future. I don't get all that, but here's what it says is going to happen. After this I looked, and there was before me a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and in front of the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. Never again will they hunger. Never again will they thirst. The sun will not beat upon them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Again, we find people waving palm branches. There's the critical difference. These people found what they were looking for. They pursued happiness, and as they waved palm branches, they really have found it. The people that were waving palm branches when Jesus came, they thought they had found happiness. Here is the person that's going to make life in this earth wonderful again. And when he didn't do that, they were very angry with him. These people are waving palm branches, but they've found the happiness that they're looking for. They've experienced earthly suffering. They went through a very difficult time, it says. Before the end, there will be hostility to Christians, and they've gone through this period of hostility, this tribulation period. They've found the happiness that they didn't find on earth. Another critical difference, when they were going into Jerusalem, the people were cheering, waving the branches, but God was weeping. Jesus is God. Here, God is not weeping. What's more, he is wiping the tears of those that perhaps had reason to weep but will never have reason to weep again. That's what it says in the passage. It says, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. The things they went through on earth, the earthly difficulties, what he does, and I don't know how this happens, but they will never again find a reason to have to cry. Why? They've found what they were looking for, the pursuit of happiness, and they've got it. And God won't allow them to remember things that are so painful, there won't be any tears in heaven. Before we go on, I want to pause here for a minute. I think we need to be careful about marrying God to visions of political progress and political liberation. You know, marrying God to causes that are political and earthly, having to do with earthly kingdoms. Jesus carefully sidestepped this kind of pressure. There was a lot of things happening in the kingdoms in which Jesus lived. Slavery was a real issue. Pedophilia was rampant. And Jesus opposed these things, but it is not what he centered on. They tried to catch him once. They said, hey, Jesus, by the way, should we pay taxes to Rome or not? And they wanted to try to catch him. And he sidestepped it. Not really sidestepped him, but he said, this is what you do. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God. They had to shut up because he got him. He didn't say, don't do that, but he said there's a couple different agendas, and they're not necessarily the same. So what's my point? God is not, I think we need to be careful, God is not a Republican. Neither is he a Democrat. God is not a capitalist. Neither is he a communist. God is a king, and his kingdom is not of this world. I think God cares about issues that have to deal with morality. By all accounts, there'll be 16,000. They'll get 16,728 signatures, and we'll be hearing about the abortion debate from here until the fall, and then afterwards. That's a lot of signatures, but it seems that they're not going to be difficult to get. There's already a couple thousand, 2,000 or 3,000, and this will be a subject of vote in the fall, and it will command national attention. We'll speak about it from time to time. I just want to shoot a couple things. I think abortion, I think it's a national blight, and I'm going to say a couple different things about it, so hang with me. The most dangerous place to live in the United States is not in the ghettos of L.A. or Dallas or New York City. It's on the other side of the birth canal. I just don't think that's right. You know, however we talk about solving the issue, the fact that the most dangerous place of real estate is on the other side of the birth canal, no. Heard that there's, since 1973, statistics indicate that anywhere from 40 to 47 million abortions have been performed in the United States. I just don't think that's okay. Second thing, I think that God calls us to speak for those who can't speak for themselves, to champion the cause of the oppressed, and those who have no power with which to get the kind of justice that they know they need to get. So in that sense, this is going to be an issue, and you know what? I think it's something we're going to have to deal with. Maybe we'd rather not deal with it. It's going to be in the papers. It's always splashed over there. And we're going to have to find our way through it. I do want to add a balance. Once the fall comes, however that falls, maybe abortion will move out of the public eye for a little bit, but there's a lot of issues that still, maybe, you know how many people have died of starvation since 1973? Children, just children. 450 million, 10 times that figure. They say 15 million die of starvation every year. And if this issue moves off the table, does God care about children lost? I think he does. Does God care about children that are starving to death? Absolutely. These are issues that we need to deal with. We're in a country where we don't deal with poverty in the sense that the world deals with poverty. So these issues are always going to be there for us. So having said that, another thing, I think God cares about people who get in situations where, whatever the reason, they lose their way. I have a chance to do a lot of fifth steps. Alcoholics Anonymous, part of what you have to do in terms of entering and going through a program of recovery is you have to come to a place where you indicate the kind of resentments and fears and sexual misconduct that has plagued your life, because it's felt that you need to speak that out to somebody to look at it in order for the drink problem to be solved, because the drink problem is, again, Mark will tell you, it's a thinking problem. And you have to get this. So I have an opportunity to do a number of these. I was speaking to a young woman once who was telling me about what was going on. We had been going several hours by this time, where she said that she had an abortion. And she went from there, and she went right on ahead. And I said, hold on just a sec. Tell me a little bit about that. For whatever the reason, I felt like it was important for her to talk about it a little bit. I didn't want to be cruel, but I did want to give her the opportunity to touch it. I said, could you tell me a little bit about that? Could you tell me about what it was like and where the office was? And I just wanted her to reconnect with the experience, and she did so. She trusted that I was not grilling her, that there was a sense of sympathy, a sense of desiring for her just to be able to talk about it. And so she talked freely. And then she started to cry, to sob. I think the thing where it talks about abortion, one dead, one wounded, I think it's true. And she was feeling her wounds. Then, as she described moving out, I said, how did you get through that experience? There were a lot of circumstances that made a very difficult choice. And she said, you're not going to believe me. And I said, well, try me. She said, no, you won't believe me. I said, try me. I think God helped me. What would you have said? Wrong. He would never do anything like that. You must have been mistaken. Did God support that? No, I think God supports life. Did he support that woman? What do you think? Could he have supported that woman? What would you have said? Does God only help the virtuous? Jesus told the story when he was hanging around with people who were considered to be out of the reach of God, tax collectors, prostitutes. He was having a discussion with these people, and there were those who were virtuous who were casting, why in the world is he dealing with them? And that's when he told the story of the prodigal son, of the individual who he made some choices. He, in his drive to live, he made some poor choices. He comes to his senses and realizes that he wants to come back to the Father, turns in that direction, and finds his Father not just waiting for him like that, but wanting to come towards him, and he does so. He made some poor choices, but then he came to a place of saying, I wonder if I can go home. And Jesus was telling this story to confront those who say, no, you can't go home, and he was saying, yes, they can come home. And that's why I'm with these people. See, Jesus didn't help the virtuous. We all lose our way in one way or another. And what Jesus was saying to them, well, he wasn't saying it to them. He was saying it to us. Some of you got lost in that choice. And you wonder if there's really a place for you or not with God. Because for some of us, this is academic, but for some of you, it's not academic. You went through it, and you have a story to tell. Is there a place for you? Jesus told that story for you. And what he was saying is, there is a place for you. There is a place, but there is a place for you. Maybe it's time for you to stop running. Maybe it's time for you to come home. Come home. You say, but I know. You say, but I know. But God, I know. But he just doesn't help the virtuous. All of us lose our way. And those are the kind of people that Jesus seemed to mix with. Some of us who have never been in a situation where we made a choice like that, Jesus categorizes us as, not just us, but those at that time, as the older brother who said, I'm not coming in. And in our virtue sometimes, we put ourselves above and beyond people. And that's the guy who never made his way into the banquet. Self-righteousness. And you'll feel that in the debate. That was the sin that characterized the people that killed Jesus. It's just another sin. It's another way people lose their way by getting so caught up in being moral that they think themselves above. And no, that's not okay. Not okay. Let's get back to the pursuit of happiness and talk about the pursuit of holiness. Because the fact is, if you pursue holiness, you'll find holiness and happiness. If you pursue happiness, you'll find neither. It's a true thing. If you pursue happiness, you will find neither happiness nor holiness. If you pursue holiness, you'll find both. And one day, you will be waving palm branches up there, having found a place where God will wipe the tears from your eyes. Pursuing holiness. You have to do a couple things. Number one, distinguish between here and there. Look what it says. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. It talks about people that the Bible holds up in high esteem. Here's what it says about them. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. I just want you to know what this says. It says these people were trusting God to keep promises, and at the time they died, they still had not received the things that God had promised them. Because the thing that God promises us, we don't get them in this life. I say that this is not heaven. This is not the Garden of Eden. I don't care what we do. We are not going to get God to somehow turn this into the thing that heaven will be. It's not heaven. And these people went through their life and difficult things happened to them. Look what it goes on and says. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. They admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. They were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared a city for them. A couple different words. It says they welcomed God's promises from afar. They looked at them. That's why we talk a lot about the promises to keep in mind. Keep God's promises in mind and keep on looking to them. They admitted that they were aliens and strangers on the earth. There's a quote here. Malcolm Muggeridge says, the only ultimate disaster that can befall us, I have come to realize, is to feel ourselves at home here on earth. As long as we are aliens, we cannot forget our true homeland. Another quote, it is not abnormal to be empty, sad, and lonely at the deepest place in our souls that was fashioned for eternity. Not abnormal to be dissatisfied with the empty provisions of this world. It is not only not abnormal, but wrong to be otherwise. What is he saying? This isn't heaven. And it's okay not to feel perfectly happy and content because this is not our home. This is not a place where God's will is done perfectly. And He will not turn this into a Garden of Eden. And these people understood that. They welcomed God's promises. They admitted that they were aliens and strangers on the earth. You see, the opposite of being a friend of the world is not being an enemy. It's being a stranger. And so we go in, but we never totally unpack our bags here. That's what Jesus asks of His followers. And finally it says they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. They knew that their final home was not going to be here. Do you realize that? As long as you're in this place, when I go back to the place where I grew up, it's no longer the home I knew. You ever experienced that? Neighborhoods change. People change. People that were your friends are gone, or they've gone to some different kind of life. And you feel that sense. Have you felt that, haven't you? That sense of, I really don't know there's a place for me. Sure, I have friends and I have family. But deep within me, there's this ache. There's a sense for something that lasts. Is that wrong to feel that? What he says is, no, it's wrong not to feel it. One day, gathered, because I think God's real. I really do. I think Jesus is God. I think He rose from the dead. I think those who believe in Him get to go where He is right now. And I think when we go there, I think we're going to feel like we're home. That's what it's going to feel like. I don't know exactly what we'll do. All I know is that we'll go, well, look what C.S. Lewis said. There have been times when I think we do not desire heaven, but more often I find myself wondering whether in our heart of hearts we have ever desired anything else. When we get there, this is what I've been looking for. And we'll wave palm branches because we will have found happiness, even though there was difficulty in this life. It says, make every effort to live in peace with all men and be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. What's involved with being holy? Okay. What's involved with being holy? Distinguishing between now and then. Look at a couple verses here as we close. It says, I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves and be holy because I am holy. Do not make yourself unclean by any creature that moves about on the ground. I am the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt to be your God. Therefore be holy because I am holy. What we're going to find is that sentence is found two different times. One in the time before Christ and one in the time after Christ. What does it mean to be holy? We'll talk about what Jesus has to do with that when we talk about thorns this Friday and vines next week. But let's not think of salvation so much now. We'll talk about that Friday and Sunday. Let's think about being followers of Christ. What does it mean to be holy? Richard Hyatt, we had a good talk about this. Richard's been doing a lot of work on this, trying to think about what it means. What's involved in being holy? It seems to say distinguishing between clean and unclean. That's what he asks here. Do not make yourselves unclean by any creature that moves about on the ground. I am the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt. So what does it mean? It means to separate yourselves from things that are unclean. That's what being holy meant on that side of the cross. And the Pharisees were really good at that. They were the ones that, at the time where there was the Maccabean revolt, they were the ones who stood for reform. And they were really powerful people. But something happened over time, that they got very rigid and harsh about, they separated themselves from anything. And is that what God asks of us now? Remove yourself from anybody questionable. Bastion yourself. Get out of contact with people who might have lost your way. Now, look what it says in 1 Peter 1, therefore prepare your minds for action, be self-controlled. Set your hope fully on the grace to be given you when Jesus Christ is revealed. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. But just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do, for it is written, be holy because I am holy. Last thing I want to leave with you, and we'll see a song after we'll listen to it and look at the words. What it means to be holy on this side of the cross, it's not distinguished between clean and unclean. That's not the driving mechanism for holiness. What is it? Distinguish between now and then. Distinguish between now and then. When we feel like we have to have it now, we demand that God gives it to us now, that's when we get into trouble. That's when we get greedy. That's when affairs come. That's when all the things that trip us up cause us to turn on others, because what we are doing is saying, I want it now, and I can get it now. And what he says to you, you want to be holy? Don't separate yourselves between clean and unclean. Distinguish between now and then. You're not going to get it all now. Let it go. If you had a relationship with Christ, you'll get it then. The more that confidence grows, you'll find the ability to let go of things. That's what it means to be holy now, to distinguish between now and then. On this side of the grave, you're never going to find happiness. Not deep. You say, but I'm happy. Yeah, there's times, life can be good. I'm not saying it's awful. Deep happiness, it's going to have to wait on the other side. When you start to distinguish between what can you expect now and then, things start to happen. Things start to change. You start to act like Jesus. Messiah, there's a song, Messiah, we're going to hear it, and it describes Jesus coming the first time and when he comes the second time. Go ahead. Father, thank you for sending your Son. Thank you that he is the King. He came the first time to usher in salvation. Give us an opportunity to be part of the kingdom that he'll establish when he returns. Would you help us to live in the light of eternity so that we might grasp for those things that are eternal, vouch for those things that are eternal. Look forward to the time when we will be there. And it's hard to really think about that being so real, but gosh, would you help us with that? So that we might, again, be able to live in the light of eternity and serve you while on earth. In Jesus' name, amen.